First of all, let me say, such a pleasure to be here with you. I have been to Oblate Renewal Center. I was here when it first opened in 1995, and I think Father Tom Ovai was the director at the time. And I was working at the Star of the North Retreat Center, and we have, between the United States retreat centers and the Canadian retreat centers, we had annual meetings even back then. We had started them in the late 80s. And so they held what we call the NACOR, the North American Conference of Oblate Retreat and Renewal Centers. We had their, the first meeting was one of the first meetings was here at ORC. So it was my experience of Texan hospitality. And every time I have come back to work either with Oblates or to work with associates, it has always been a warm and wonderful experience. This time not so warm, but compared to Edmonton, Alberta, where I am from, it's hot here, I have to tell you. So I also want to start with a kind of a clarification. I am there are 3 Canadian provinces of the Oblates, as you probably know. So the first one is, one of the first ones, is Notre-Dame-de-Cap. And we have 3 representatives from Notre-Dame-de-Cap here, Father Luc and Elise, and Marta is over here. And the second province is Assumption Province, and we have 3. We have Father Adam, Father Alfred, and Father Peter. 1, 2, 3. All right. That's the Polish-speaking province in Canada. And I am from, proud to say, OMI Lacombe, Canada. And we have Father Ken Thorson is here. We have Debbie Dornbos, who is an associate with me in Edmonton, Alberta, and Gail Hillier, who is an associate from Eastern Canada, Ontario, Ottawa, our capital. Each one of the 3 Canadian provinces does something different with associates. So I am going to be speaking as an Oblate associate of OMI Lacombe, Canada, and as an honorary Oblate. And I think that's probably a congregational identity. But I urge you to meet with the other representatives from the other Canadian provinces to find out what it is that they do with association. Okay, so Frank talked about, and Tom did last night, about our vocation as the baptized, right? The universal call to holiness that Vatican II really put into our consciousness in a new way. It's always been there in our church. It's not a new ecclesiology. It's not a new spirituality, but it wasn't at the forefront. And so I would like to share with you my story of discipleship, of feeling that I have been called, knowing that I have been blessed to share this charism with the Oblates. And I'm going to do it in the context of 3 Oblates. 2 you probably don't know. 1 I think you do know. The first one is Brother Anthony Kowalczyk, Canadian, Polish-born, an immigrant Oblate from Canada. The second one, Father Albert Lacombe, whom my province is named after. Those are the 2 you might not know. You might know this one, St. Eugene de Mazenod. Okay? So I'm going to talk about my story because our stories are how we connect, right? You hear someone's story and we resonate with that and say, you know, that's happened to me, or that kind of feels like the same thing. So I want to talk about the story of being called, called to share a charism. Okay, so Brother Anthony Kowalczyk, he was born in 1866. He died in 1947. He was born in Poland, died in Western Canada, where I am from, in Edmonton, Alberta. He was a Polish immigrant. He came to Canada in 1896 as an Oblate brother, and he came as a missionary when he was 30 years old. Came out to Western Canada to work with where the Oblates were at the time, which was with mostly Indigenous people. He was trained as a blacksmith, and he helped to build the missions out in the rural Western Canada, setting up the church in Western Canada. He lost his arm, one of his arms, in a tragic sawmill accident, And he spent the rest of his life at one of the colleges, the Oblate College in Edmonton, Alberta, College Saint-Jean. He was French-speaking, didn't learn ever to speak French very well. So he spent his life as the blacksmith, then as the handyman, then as the caregiver, he took care of the buildings at College Saint-Jean. But he was a friend to everyone. He was known for his piety and his sanctity, his simplicity, his prayerfulness. He got the nickname of Brother Ave because he responded to every request with, he would pray to Mary, he would pray to Mary. And his cause is up for sainthood right now. Where I worked at Star of the North on Mission Hill, this is what his grave looks like in the Oblate Cemetery. People make pilgrimages to it. They pray for his intercession. He truly is a model of simplicity and holiness. So why do I talk to you about Brother Anthony? When he was a young man still in Hamburg, he had gone there from his home in Poland to find work. And he was apprenticing as a metal worker, and he was searching for meaning in life. He had a heart for God. He was on fire with God, but he had nowhere to go with it, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he was wandering unhappily through Hamburg one day. He was longing for a place where he could practice his faith and where he could live it freely and fully and where he could witness to God. And he threw himself on his knees in the middle of the street and he cried out, "God, I believe in you with all my heart." And he heard a voice telling him to go to a particular city in Germany, Mülheim am Rhein. And he went there and he found lodging with a very saintly, holy family, the Prunenbaums. And they happened to have a son who was studying to be an oblate. He was in the Oblate Juniorate. And the mother listened to Brother Anthony at that time, listened to him and heard of his hunger for God and longing to serve God. And she talked to him about becoming an oblate maybe. And he had no education, he had nothing, and he protested that he couldn't. And so she told him about the vocation of being a brother. And she talked to him about the Canadian missions especially, the difficult ones and how exciting they were. And something in Anthony lit up. And he went, you have to imagine, he went to the Oblate house and he knocked on the front door, and there he is. He's in his humble working man clothes. He's got his work boots on and his hat and his coveralls, and he knocks on the door, and the novice master comes and says to him, as the biographers say, says to him rather roughly, "What do you want? I suppose you're looking for a job." And Anthony replied very, very simply. He said, "I was told here I could serve God. I was told here I could serve God." Precisely. Right? Isn't that what we're all looking for? Isn't that the deepest hungers of our hearts? When Tom and Frank talk about our baptismal gifts, or our vocation, and that we're gifted, we're longing to serve and to offer those gifts. For me, that's the line that resonates with my heart. Because I was, at one point in my life, a young mom, 3 kids, studying theology, had a 4th kid while I was studying theology, and looking for a place to use that. This is back in the mid-'80s, and I'm a woman, a mother, in the church, getting a Master's of Theology degree and wondering, what do you do with that? Where do you go? How do you serve God? And I was searching and I was seeking, and my poor husband, I was working on my thesis, I'd finished my coursework. My poor husband, every 6 months, he would say, "Are you ever going to get a job?" And I would say to him, "I don't know, but I got to do this." And I decided that even if I never got a job with my theology, I thought I'd go back to being a waitress which I had done when I was in first year university. And I said to him, but I'll be a really good waitress because I got all this theology. I'll be compassionate, I'll be patient, I'll be a great waitress, right? But that's what the hunger was, to use my baptismal, to answer that baptismal call, the call to discipleship. I had fallen in love with God, and I wanted to proclaim that from the rooftops, the good news. Edwina Gately is a wonderful, wonderful theologian, and she has a one-line definition of evangelizing, because when I first started this, I had no clue what that meant, right? She had a one-line definition of evangelizing. Let me tell you what God has done for me. Let me tell you what God has done for me. Let me tell you what God has done for me, and let me tell you what God has done for you. That's what it's about. That's precisely what it's about. So there I am. Where will I go? Well, enter the Oblates, literally, with a phone call one day to say, while I'm trying to write my thesis, finish coursework, wandering in this limbo of not knowing what I'm doing, would I consider applying for a job at the Oblate Retreat House? Well, with trepidation, fear, and trembling, I did. And I got the job, and I started working. And I was there for 21 years as the director. They called me forth. They empowered me. They named the gifts that I didn't even know I had, and they gave me a place to use them. They gave me my rooftop. They gave me a place to preach and a place to teach and a place to talk about, do you know what God has done for us? And I am forever grateful for that opportunity to be able to use my gifts. They gave me a place for my vocation. It is mission, it's service, it's what we all hunger and long for when we fall in love with this amazing God, to be able to offer our gifts. I was told here I could serve God, and I found it to be so. Brother Anthony. The second one, Father Albert Lacombe, 1827 to 1916. Father Albert Lacombe was a missionary for Canada, for Western Canada in particular. He was a missionary priest. He was a champion for Native rights in our country. He was a builder of the Western Canadian Church. His biographer says he was this ruggedly handsome, part Aboriginal son of a Quebecois farmer. He called himself un petit sauvage with itchy feet, because he started as a diocesan priest, right? He started as a diocesan priest, but his hunger for adventure, his desire to just go out and proclaim this God that he knew, it pushed him out beyond his diocese into the West, where he had the heart to go to the marginalized, to go to where the church didn't go. Does that begin to sound familiar to us? So he goes to the First Nations people, he goes to the Métis people, and he lives with them. He goes on buffalo hunts with them. He nurses them during the many epidemics that happen. He barters peace treaties between them, and he negotiates on their behalf with the federal and the provincial governments. He takes his place alongside them. And he's a missionary through and through, but he's still diocesan. And what happens with him is, while he's in his travels through the wilds of Western Canada, he meets another priest, a missionary priest. And he starts to hang out with this fellow. And they strike up a friendship, and Lacombe, he says, he finds something there in this fellow missionary that there arises in him a desire to be like him. And of course, it's an oblate, because that's what the Oblates were doing in Canada at that time, was missionizing the West and the North. His name is Father Legare, And Lacombe says, Father Ligari, he says, he was the instrument to give me the idea to enter the Oblates. He said, I had found someone whose motto applied to me. I was going to try the Latin, but I'm not gonna. I am sent to evangelize the poor are evangelized. And something in Lacombe's heart resonated with that. And he knew that he needed the discipline and the community of people, of men like him, men who shared that heart. He said, their motto applied to me. It was a kinship of spirit. He had found a home for his heart. It took him 2 years. He had a flying novitiate, but eventually he professed himself as an oblate of Mary Immaculate. They didn't get to meet very often, but he said when they did, the missionaries, the oblates got together, the fellowship that they shared, the community that they shared was life-giving, and it was what he needed. So he found a home for his heart in the community of the Oblates. What I found, starting work at Star of the North, not really familiar with the Oblates at all. I had had professors who were Oblates, but they didn't really talk about Eugene, didn't really talk about the Oblate Charism. This now is the early 90s. It took the canonization of Eugene to bring that to the forefront and to bring the conversation about the charism to the forefront. But gradually, as I was hanging around with these Oblates, being invited into their community, coming to sense gradually something of what they were about, something of their spirit that held them together, their hospitality, their commitment to going to the edges, their empowerment and calling forth of women, their love of the church, but their willingness also to push the edges and critique the church when it needed to be critiqued. All of this, I realized there's something bigger than me here. There's something there in that community. It's not only a place where I can serve God, it's also a community of men and women, because by this time there were associates with us. It's a community of men and women who share the same gospel fire, the same spirit. And I found a home for my heart in the community of the Oblates. I will say this here publicly. I am not sure I could have survived in the institutional church in some of its forms if I had not had my ecclesial connection be the Oblates. I've never been in an Oblate parish. I've always been in a diocesan parish. But my ecclesial home is with the Oblates. And I am blessed that that's a reality. The same gospel fire. And I am connected into a basic Oblate community where we meet regularly. We do formation together. We share our faith stories, our life stories, Oblates and associates alike. And it is the community that gives me life. They support me and they empower me, but they challenge me and they call me to accountability and to responsibility. You know, de Mazenod says that the community is for personal sanctification and for the purpose of mission. And I have found that to be so. And I know that I am gifted and blessed in having that happen. The third Oblate. This is the one I'm actually going to speak least about because you know him the best. But I came to know him, if you looked at what Tom was talking about last night, with the idea of how he talked about, I forget the order he had vocation first and ministry. I came to Eugene last. I had the call first, the mission, the being able to serve, then the being invited into community and coming to know something about community. And at that point still, it was kind of like, I kind of liken it to, it's a little bit like osmosis. You know, I'm not great on biology or anything, but you know osmosis, when two cells get together and there's a transfer between the cells, a permeable membrane. I always figure if you rub up on Oblate and hang out about Oblate communities, something rubs off, right? It wasn't deliberate, the coming to know the charism in the early 90s. But we began, because of the canonization, we began to do work at the retreat house on the spirit of Eugene de Mazenod. We ran some retreat evenings. We called them Share Their Spirit. And we invited Oblates from the region who had been on the de Mazenod experience in Aix-en-Provence. They had been on that Aix experience, and they came back on fire with Eugene. We had about 6 evenings, and every night, an Oblate spoke about a different aspect of St. Eugene and the charism. And that was the first time I began to be intrigued by this man. I thought, you know, he's more than a pretty face. There you go. The first one that got me, and you probably can identify with this, the first one that got me was the homily at the Church of the Madeleine, right? Do you know who you are in the eyes of God? Do you want some good news? Let me tell you who you are in the eyes of God. Powerful. I mean, when you read that, you just can imagine what, because of the people who he's speaking to. He's not talking to the aristocrats, and he's not talking to the powerful people. He's talking to the people from the streets. Do you know your dignity? So that's the first one that got me. And then seeing the Oblates incarnate that, because Eugene, of course, was going to the streets, right? He was going to the marginalized, and that's where the Oblates went, to go where the church isn't, and where it is, to go to the people it touches the least. So that was my first inkling about Eugene de Mazenod himself, that there was really something powerful there. The second one that intrigued me and drew me and resonated with me was his Good Friday conversion experience, right? Where before the cross, Eugene recognizes who he is and recognizes who Jesus is for him. The experience of knowing oneself to be a sinner, and then the instant experience of knowing that you are a beloved one, a forgiven, redeemed sinner in the eyes of a merciful, merciful God. And that just resonated with me personally. It's another story. So the Oblates, in living that out, you know, that God is mercy, God is compassion in that time, and then as they continue to carry that forward, to witness to that God, I just thought that is such a message that our world still needs today. And I wanted to know more about who is this man, and began to learn more and more about his charism, the way the gospel filters through him. And I loved his sense of wanting to give everything, pour it out, right? We have received everything, and what we do is we give back everything. Our life becomes that response. When we know what God has done for us, we can't keep that secret. That's the good news. And so we pour ourselves out for that, the oblation, and the call that Eugene had right from the very beginning. He scooped Vatican II, right? The universal call to holiness. Eugene had it way before the church articulated it like that. We are called to be saints. And Pope Francis is saying it right now again. Eugene's got that. We got that already. We're all called to be saints. His oblates first, his beloved brothers, his confreres. But then that's what we have to call each and every person to make them aware of their dignity before God and their ability to respond to that, open-hearted, pouring everything out. So, you know, Eugene, he's fiery, he's impetuous, he's autocratic, but he's also tender-hearted, he's compassionate, he's courageous, he's going to challenge anybody, no matter their position in the church, if he thinks they're not being true to the gospel and true to Jesus Christ. He's madly in love with Jesus Christ and the cross and how Christ saves us through that cross. He says the real poverty in life is not to know Jesus. And I know that. I know that personally. So there it is. Come to know this man, and I see that he has a heart unto Christ. He has a heart unto mine. And I share a spirit with him. And that's how you come to be invited to share a charism with a religious congregation. The Oblates have recognized that. They have recognized, as Frank says, that the charism is not in a closed box. Just try to keep the Spirit in a closed box. You'll see how that works. The Spirit's not in a closed box. The Spirit goes where the Spirit will, and it's coming through Eugene, and it's coming through the Oblates, and it's coming out into the world, and it's coming to lay people. And you have recognized that. Witnessing as Apostolic Community, the chapter document from 1992. Awesome stuff about laity and associates and the call. And they say this. Those chapter delegates said, "We are not the owners of our charism. It belongs to the church. And so we are happy when we see that lay persons who are called by God want to share it." I always say, can you imagine where the charism could go if we truly believed that the baptized could carry it? That we could be oblate in the world, as vowed oblates are in the world and in the church, but we can go to all kinds of places that I don't think we've even imagined yet. So, we're all called to discipleship. That's the message from last night. It's the message from today, from Frank. It's by virtue of our baptism. We are anointed as I have to use the term laity because we don't have another term. We're all the laos, vowed religious. We all start out as the baptized, and we experience different calls within that milieu. Some will be called to religious life, to ordination, to deacon, to brother. Some will be called to sister, to a religious sister. Some will be called to married life. Some will be called to single life. Some will be called to be parents. God calls us in all kinds of different ways, but God does call us. And God calls us to use our gifts in service of one another, in service of the church, in service of the world, in service of our brothers and sisters everywhere. So we can say, how can we say, here we can serve God. What's your mission? How do you live that call to serve out? How do you use the gifts that God has blessed you with? How do you use those gifts to serve God? That's your mission. Here is a home for our hearts. How do you do that in relationship? In connection with this oblate community that both empowers us and challenges us and nurtures us and sends us out, and we come back and we go out and we come back. How do we live community with this religious congregation? And finally, how do our hearts resonate? Here is a heart in Eugene, incarnated today in the Oblates and in the associates and all who share the charism. There's an Oblate heart that resonates there. How do we recognize it? How do we live it? How do we deepen it so that we can be that oblation that we're called to? Unto Christ. I know that I am blessed to be an Oblate associate and an honorary Oblate. It has been the way. I started in the late 80s, started at Star of the North in 1991, and it has been an increasing journey of learning and growing and being invited and challenged and celebrated and terrified sometimes at what I've been called to do. But it is the way I live my baptismal calling. It is, I can say now, I couldn't have said it 15 years ago, it's my vocation. And I am so grateful. I am grateful to the Oblates for the vision to have this, to recognize that the charism isn't in the box. The charism flows into hearts wherever the Spirit wants the charism to go. And that the response of the Oblates in my life has been life-giving for me. I'm blessed and I am grateful. In OMI Lacombe, our associates meet with the Oblates regularly in their basic Oblate communities. And when we do things, and convocations and assemblies and those things, and the Oblates have said, we have testimonies galore from the Oblates to say when the associates are with them, there's a deeper level of faith sharing, right? There's new challenges that come out. And, I mean, there's things both ways, but we are hearing that that's precisely right. There's some new life, some new, and new perspectives. We offer, I'm a lay associate, I offer a woman's perspective on living the charism in the world. And what the documents will say is, the vowed Oblates, pardon me, are not going to be able to tell me how to live the charism. As a lay woman, as a wife and as a mother and as a grandmother, I'm going to incarnate the charism in a particular way. And that, I'll show you how what that's going to look like, right? and so will Debbie, and so will Elise, and and Gail will live the charism in community, though, because that's the life-giving. We don't want to do it alone. It's in community with the Oblates. It's one charism. It's one Spirit.